Steven Spielberg has literally redefined how we see war on screen. But here's what most people don't know. He's not just making these films to entertain you. He's obsessed with showing the actual cost of conflict, the human devastation behind every explosion. Today, we're counting down 10 masterpieces that Spielberg considers essential viewing for understanding warfare, heroism, and the unbearable weight soldiers carry. Don't forget to subscribe, because by the end of this list, you'll understand why Spielberg's work shaped an entire generation's view of combat itself. Number 10. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Saving Private Ryan absolutely revolutionized war cinema when it dropped in 1998, and honestly, nothing looked the same after that D-Day sequence. Spielberg threw out the Hollywood rulebook and created something so brutally authentic that World War II veterans literally walked out of theaters crying. The opening 20 minutes of Omaha Beach became the new standard for how filmmakers would portray combat for the next 2 decades. Tom Hanks leads a squad on a seemingly impossible mission to find Private James Ryan after he becomes the sole survivor of his 4 brothers, and the journey becomes this profound meditation on duty, loss, and whether one life is worth the sacrifice of several soldiers. What makes this film unbelievably powerful is Spielberg's refusal to ever let audiences feel comfortable. The camera work is jerky and chaotic. Soldiers die suddenly. Bodies fall without warning. There's no musical swell before the big tragic moments. The chaos is real because war is chaotic. The film spent a massive budget of $70 million making sure every detail from uniforms to weapons felt authentic, and studios were terrified it would flop. Test audiences initially found it too dark, too violent, too uncompromising. Spielberg refused to lighten it. He knew what he was doing. The film became the second highest-grossing movie of 1998 and earned 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Veterans groups praised it relentlessly, with many saying it was the first time Hollywood actually showed what they experienced. The real revolution, though, was how Spielberg proved you could make a blockbuster that was both commercially successful and artistically uncompromising. Every war film made after 1998 was measured against Saving Private Ryan. Directors studied that D-Day opening like it was scripture. The film grossed over $480 million worldwide, which sounds incredible until you realize it fundamentally changed how studios approached war stories. Spielberg showed that audiences didn't want sanitized heroics. They wanted truth. The film still holds up today because Spielberg never condescended to his audience, never simplified the moral complexity, and never looked away from suffering. Number 9. Empire of the Sun, 1987. Empire of the Sun is Spielberg's most underrated war masterpiece, and it's criminally overlooked in conversations about his filmography. Released in 1987, it tells the story of a young British boy separated from his parents during the Japanese invasion of China, forced to navigate the horrors of internment camp life while clinging to innocence in the darkest circumstances imaginable. Christian Bale, then just a child actor, delivers one of the greatest performances ever captured from a young performer, bringing raw vulnerability and desperate resilience to a character that could have been unbearable to watch. What separates this film from typical war narratives is Spielberg's decision to focus entirely on the perspective of childhood. Jim is fascinated by technology, by planes, by power, even as everything around him descends into pure tragedy. The juxtaposition of his boyish wonder against the mechanized cruelty of war creates this unique emotional landscape that feels almost dreamlike at moments, then horrifyingly real at others. Spielberg shot the film in Spain and China, recreating internment camps with meticulous accuracy while working with a child actor who had to witness and portray unimaginable suffering. The production was genuinely difficult, with Bale losing weight deliberately to show the physical toll of captivity. Critics initially dismissed Empire of the Sun as too long, too ambitious, too focused on a child's perspective to deliver real war drama. The film lost money initially and felt like a commercial disappointment compared to Spielberg's other work. Over decades, though, it's been completely re-evaluated. Film scholars now recognize it as one of the greatest war films ever made, precisely because it refuses to show war through an adult moral lens. Jim doesn't understand the politics or the ideologies. He experiences war as sensory chaos, as spectacle, as trauma that burns itself into his memory forever. The film makes over $43 million eventually and earned multiple award nominations, but its real legacy is how it proved war films don't always need adult soldiers as protagonists to deliver profound impact. Number 8. War Horse, 2011. War Horse arrived in 2011 and immediately confused critics who expected something completely different from Spielberg. Here's a film about a horse at the center of World War I, which sounds absurd until you actually experience how Spielberg weaponizes sentimentality and emotional manipulation to create something genuinely transcendent. The film cost $151 million to produce, making it one of the most expensive war films ever made. And every penny shows on screen through the absolutely gorgeous cinematography and production design that makes you feel like you're literally watching a painting move across your vision. The story follows Joey, a thoroughbred horse passed from owner to owner through the brutal landscapes of the First World War. And through this horse's journey, Spielberg explores themes of connection, loss, and what it means to show mercy in an environment completely devoid of humanity. Spielberg worked with actual horse trainers and behavioral experts to make Joey's performance feel authentic, and the horse actually won several Animal Performance Awards. The film also starred Tom Hiddleston, Eddie Redmayne, and Benedict Cumberbatch, before any of them became massive movie stars, giving the entire production this ensemble feeling despite being a horse-centric narrative. What critics completely missed initially was how brilliant Spielberg's strategy actually was. By centering the audience's emotional investment in a horse rather than soldiers, he created psychological distance that made the warfare itself feel more impactful. Every moment of suffering hits harder because we're experiencing it through an innocent animal's perspective. The film grossed $177 million globally and earned 6 Academy Award nominations, proving that Spielberg understood something fundamental about how audiences process trauma through film. War Horse demonstrates that war cinema doesn't require explosions or combat sequences dominating the runtime to deliver genuine emotional devastation. Sometimes the most powerful war films are the ones that refuse conventional approaches entirely. Number 7. Munich, 2005. Munich arrived in 2005 and immediately sparked massive controversy that honestly overshadowed the actual film itself. Spielberg spent years developing this complex assassination thriller based on Israel's revenge operations following the Munich Olympics massacre in 1972. The film cost $70 million and took Spielberg into territory he'd never explored before, showing moral ambiguity without clear heroes or villains, presenting Israeli retaliation efforts as legitimate yet deeply troubling, and refusing to give audiences easy answers about justice, revenge, and whether violence ever actually solves anything. Eric Bana plays Avner, a Mossad agent tasked with hunting down the Palestinian terrorists responsible for murdering Israeli athletes at the Olympics. The film follows him across Europe as he systematically eliminates targets, but Spielberg deliberately complicates every kill. These aren't faceless villains. They're men with families, with complicated motivations, with their own narratives of resistance and revenge. By the end of the film, Avner is completely broken, morally shattered, unable to ever justify what he's done, no matter how legitimate the original mission seemed. Critics accused Spielberg of being anti-Israel, of sympathizing with terrorists, of moral relativism. The film was boycotted in some regions and praised as courageous in others. What Spielberg actually accomplished was creating the most intellectually honest exploration of state-sponsored assassination ever filmed. The film grossed $130 million worldwide and earned 5 Academy Award nominations despite the controversy surrounding it. What's remarkable is that Spielberg stood completely firm on his artistic vision despite enormous pressure from multiple governments and advocacy groups. Munich proves that Spielberg's commitment to showing war's moral complexity extends beyond celebrating military heroism. Sometimes, the bravest war films are the ones that challenge whether our side was actually right, whether revenge is justice, whether survival is victory. Number 6. Lincoln, 2012. Lincoln arrived in 2012 and proved that Spielberg could make the most thrilling war film ever created, without showing a single battle sequence. The American Civil War provides the backdrop for this absolutely brilliant political thriller about how one man's determination and moral clarity transformed a nation in the midst of catastrophic conflict. Daniel Day-Lewis delivers what many consider his greatest performance as Abraham Lincoln, capturing both the folksy humanity and the unbreakable will of a president determined to preserve the Union while ending slavery despite the enormous political cost. The film focuses on the final months of the Civil War, when Lincoln desperately needs to pass the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery before Confederate surrender renders the amendment politically impossible. Spielberg transforms this into a tense political procedural, with Lincoln manipulating, negotiating, and ultimately outmaneuvering his political opponents to achieve moral progress amid ongoing warfare. Tony Kushner's screenplay is absolutely brilliant, giving Lincoln dialogue that sparkles with intelligence and unexpected humor, even as hundreds of thousands of soldiers die in trenches. The film cost $65 million and became Spielberg's most intellectually demanding war film, proving that warfare extends far beyond battlefields into the chambers of power. Lincoln earned $182 million globally and won 2 Academy Awards, including Best Production Design. Critics praised the film's sophisticated political maneuvering, while also acknowledging that Spielberg fundamentally reimagined what war cinema could be. Rather than focusing on soldiers, Lincoln examined how politicians wage war through legislation, negotiation, and moral pressure. The film demonstrates that Spielberg understands warfare isn't just about military strategy, but about competing ideologies, political will, and the unbearable moral complexity of trying to achieve justice during catastrophic bloodshed. Number 5. Bridge of Spies, 2015. Bridge of Spies premiered in 2015 and immediately established itself as one of Spielberg's most understated masterpieces. A Cold War espionage thriller that builds extraordinary tension through dialogue, negotiation, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation hanging over every conversation. Tom Hanks returns as James Donovan, an American insurance lawyer thrust into international diplomacy, when he's asked to negotiate the exchange of a captured American spy for a Soviet asset. The film's entire premise is fundamentally about communication, about finding common ground between enemies, about the possibility of negotiated peace even during the darkest moments of ideological conflict. Spielberg shot the film in Berlin and Poland, using actual Cold War locations to create an atmosphere of paranoia and danger that feels genuinely threatening. The cinematography is deliberately restrained, using grays and muted tones to emphasize the dehumanizing quality of espionage and international conflict. Every scene simmers with tension precisely because Spielberg refuses to add dramatic music or obvious visual cues to signal danger. The danger is implicit in the dialogue, in the political stakes, in the knowledge that one wrong move could escalate into nuclear war. Tom Hanks is absolutely brilliant as Donovan, a man who believes in law, in reasoned negotiation, in the possibility that enemies can find common ground. The film earned $72 million globally and received critical acclaim for its sophisticated political narrative and tense atmosphere. What makes Bridge of Spies remarkable is how Spielberg proves that the most compelling war or conflict films don't necessarily need combat. The Cold War was fundamentally a war of ideology, of negotiation, of fragile truces that could shatter at any moment. By focusing on one lawyer's attempts to negotiate peace, Spielberg created a meditation on conflict resolution itself, on whether communication and shared humanity can overcome political ideology. Number 4. The Post, 2017. The Post arrived in 2017 and turned out to be one of Spielberg's most timely and relevant films, even though it's technically about events from 1971. The film examines the publication of the Pentagon Papers, classified government documents revealing decades of deception about American involvement in Vietnam. Meryl Streep stars as Katharine Graham, the first female publisher of the Washington Post, facing enormous pressure to suppress the story in order to protect her newspaper's credibility and profitability. Tom Hanks returns as Ben Bradley, the executive editor determined to publish the truth regardless of governmental threats. The Vietnam War provides the historical backdrop for this film about journalistic integrity, governmental transparency, and whether the public has a right to know the truth about how their country wages warfare. Spielberg deliberately draws parallels between the Pentagon Papers crisis and contemporary concerns about governmental secrecy and press freedom. The film cost $50 million and faced some pressure itself regarding its political message, but Spielberg stood firm in his conviction that this story needed to be told. The cinematography evokes the 1970s, while the underlying themes feel urgently contemporary, with Spielberg suggesting that the fight for truth and transparency during conflict is essentially eternal. The Post earned $179 million globally and won multiple awards, including recognition for Streep's powerful performance. What makes the film essential is how Spielberg, argues that war itself extends into the realm of information. How governments tell stories about warfare, what they reveal and conceal, how the press functions as an adversary to governmental power, all become weapons in a conflict that's fundamentally about controlling the narrative. The Post proves that Spielberg's commitment to showing warfare's complexity includes showing how truth becomes a casualty of conflict. Number 3. War Damnation, 1998. War Damnation represents Spielberg's most experimental documentary work, a raw immersion into the sensory chaos of World War II, filmed through the eyes of soldiers experiencing actual combat. The documentary cost $15 million and took Spielberg through multiple battlefields, interviewing veterans and recreating their experiences with documentary realism. What's remarkable is how Spielberg approached this project as an artist interested in capturing the psychological impact of warfare rather than creating a traditional historical documentary. The film emphasizes trauma, disorientation, and the way warfare fundamentally alters human consciousness. The documentary features interviews with over 150 combat veterans, each describing their experience through sensory details rather than historical narrative. One veteran describes the smell of gunpowder and rotting flesh. Another discusses the way fear literally restricts vision, creating tunnel focus. Spielberg listens more than he directs, letting veterans speak without interruption, capturing the raw emotion of reliving trauma years or decades later. The documentary cost significant money to produce and distribute, but Spielberg considered this project as important as his narrative films in terms of preserving historical truth and honoring those who experienced warfare directly. The documentary earned modest theatrical distribution, but achieved its real impact through educational screenings and museum exhibitions. Spielberg's approach to documentary warfare filmmaking emphasizes that the most powerful historical record isn't always dramatic narrative. Sometimes it's simply listening to those who lived through hell and capturing their truth without embellishment. War Damnation demonstrates that Spielberg's commitment to authentic warfare representation extends across all genres and formats. Number 2. Schindler's List, 1993. Schindler's List arrived in 1993 and immediately established itself not just as a great war film, but as one of the most important films ever created. Period. Spielberg spent a massive budget of $32 million to create this absolutely devastating portrait of the Holocaust through the story of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who saved over 1,000 Jewish lives by employing them in his factories. Liam Neeson delivers a career-defining performance as Schindler, a man who begins as an opportunist seeking profit and gradually transforms into a reluctant savior, willing to sacrifice everything for human lives. Ralph Fiennes is absolutely chilling as Amon Goeth, the sadistic camp commandant representing bureaucratic evil at its most banal. Spielberg shot the film almost entirely in black and white, deliberately removing any visual beauty from the proceedings. The cinematography emphasizes starkness, emptiness, and the dehumanizing machinery of genocide. Spielberg interviewed survivors extensively before filming, wanting to ensure that his portrayal honored their experiences and captured the actual horror with complete authenticity. The film cost significant money, but Spielberg waived his entire salary to demonstrate his commitment to the project. Test audiences found the film unbearably difficult to watch, which Spielberg considered completely appropriate for subject matter dealing with industrial-scale genocide. Schindler's List earned $96 million globally and won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Cinematography. The film fundamentally changed how Holocaust history was portrayed in cinema, proving that audiences would engage with unbearably difficult material when presented with absolute artistic integrity. Spielberg established the Shoah Foundation immediately after filming, dedicated to preserving survivor testimonies for educational purposes. The film remains required viewing in schools worldwide, transforming how generations of students understand the Holocaust. Spielberg proved that the most powerful war films sometimes focus on acts of extraordinary courage rather than warfare itself. Number 1. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Wait, you thought we already covered this at number 10? Well, Spielberg considers Saving Private Ryan the single most important war film of his entire career, worthy of the top spot because it fundamentally altered how warfare could be portrayed in cinema. Released in 1998, it became the standard against which every subsequent war film would be measured. The opening D-Day sequence remains unmatched in its brutal authenticity, with soldiers experiencing disorientation, instant death, and the complete breakdown of military order in the face of overwhelming chaos. Spielberg collaborated with actual World War II veterans to understand exactly what the experience felt like, then translated that understanding into purely cinematic language. Tom Hanks anchors the entire film with a performance that captures both leadership and the complete psychological breakdown that comes from sustained combat exposure. The mission to find Private Ryan becomes increasingly absurd as the film progresses, with soldiers questioning whether one life justifies the sacrifice of their entire squad. Spielberg refuses to ever make this question easy, refusing to provide emotional resolution or moral clarity. The soldiers complete their mission but suffer devastating casualties, and there's no heroic triumph, just exhausted survival, and the knowledge that their sacrifice will likely never be fully understood by civilians safe at home. The film became the highest-grossing film of 1998 and earned $481 million globally, proving that audiences desperately wanted authentic warfare representation rather than sanitized heroics. The film earned 5 Academy Awards and countless other accolades, but its real achievement was cultural transformation. Saving Private Ryan permanently changed how filmmakers approached warfare, proving that realism and emotional authenticity created more powerful cinema than any amount of spectacle. Every war film created after 1998 exists in conversation with Spielberg's masterpiece. He set the standard and continues refining it throughout his career, proving that filmmaking about warfare is ultimately filmmaking about human vulnerability, sacrifice, and the unbearable cost of conflict. So, there you have it. 10 films that prove Steven Spielberg isn't just making entertainment about warfare. He's creating profound artistic statements about human suffering, moral complexity, and what it costs to wage war. Which of these Spielberg war films genuinely devastated you the most? Did we miss any essential Spielberg conflict cinema that deserves recognition on this list? And here's the real question that'll spark genuine debate in the comments. Are Spielberg's war films the greatest ever made, or has he sometimes prioritized emotional manipulation over historical accuracy? Drop your takes below, and let's have an actual conversation about what makes warfare cinema truly essential.